Nolan Pierce had survived 4 years of solo parenting, a dying mother, and a marriage that fell apart so quietly he almost didn't notice it was gone. He thought he was ready for anything. He was not ready for Celine Cross, the woman who built a billion-dollar company from a wheelchair and still managed to make him feel like he was the one who needed saving. If you're new here, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this story travels. Now let's get into it. The text was supposed to go to Marcus. That was the part Nolan would replay for weeks afterward. How something so small, so stupid, so completely ordinary could become the thing that changed everything. He hadn't even looked at the screen when he typed it. He'd been standing outside the elevator on the 14th floor of the Vertex Innovations building, still carrying the paper cup of terrible orientation coffee, and he'd fired off the message the same way he fired off 100 messages a day. Fast, without thinking. I thought she would be intimidating, but she's stunning. Marcus Webb, his best friend since college, was supposed to get that text. Marcus, who had spent the better part of 3 weeks sending Nolan job listings with increasingly desperate subject lines like, "Bro, they have benefits." And Nolan, "I am begging you." And finally, the one that had actually worked, the CEO is like 30 and apparently runs the whole thing from a wheelchair and built it herself. You'd respect the hell out of her. Just apply. Marcus had been right. Nolan had respected her. In the 10 minutes he'd spent watching Celine Cross address 40 new hires in a glass-walled conference room on the 12th floor. She had spoken without notes, without filler words, without the practiced warmth that corporate executives usually deployed like a weapon. She had been direct. A little blunt, actually. She'd said something in the first 2 minutes that most people in her position would never say out loud. "I don't need you to be loyal to me. I need you to be honest with me." There's a difference, and most people in this industry have forgotten it. The room had gone quiet in a way that was different from polite quiet. It was the quiet of people actually thinking. Nolan had thought, "She means it." And then he'd thought, almost involuntarily, because he was human and she was, objectively, factually, a striking woman. Stunning. He had meant to tell Marcus that. Marcus, who would have responded with 3 fire emojis and a voice memo of himself cackling. Instead, his phone buzzed 30 seconds after he sent it. The message preview appeared at the top of his screen. Celine Cross. An interesting thing to send your new CEO. For a full 3 seconds, Nolan did not breathe. He looked at the conversation thread. He looked at the name at the top. He looked at the little profile image. A small square photo of a woman in a charcoal blazer, expression neutral, photographed the way executives get photographed when they don't particularly enjoy being photographed. He had, somehow, with the supernatural incompetence that only true catastrophe produces, sent a personal text to the woman whose company had just hired him 45 minutes ago. His brain offered him several responses in rapid sequence. Throw the phone out the window. Quit now, before she fires you. Tell her it was meant for someone else. That last one. That was the right one. That was the obvious, sensible adult response. He started typing. "I am so sorry. That was meant for a friend. I apologize for the completely inappropriate." He stopped. Then he deleted it. Not because he wasn't sorry. He was. His entire body was conducting some kind of internal emergency. But there was something about the message she'd sent back, the phrasing of it, an interesting thing to send your new CEO, that didn't read like anger. It read like a person deciding, in real time, what they thought about something. He stared at his phone. Then he typed, slowly this time. "It was meant for my best friend. He talked me into applying for this job, and I was giving him an update. I understand if that's grounds for ending my first day before lunch." He hit send. He stood very still in the hallway. His phone buzzed. "Celine Cross. What time does your orientation end?" "Nolan, 4 p.m. Celine Cross. Come to the 14th floor at 4:15, room 1402. That was it. No explanation, no indication of what would happen when he got there. Just an instruction, the way someone gives instructions when they're used to giving them and have never had much patience for suspense. Nolan put his phone in his pocket. He went back to orientation. He did not retain a single piece of information for the rest of the afternoon. Set. Room 1-4. O2 turned out to be a small meeting room at the end of a corridor that felt separated from the rest of the floor, quieter, with better light, the kind of space that someone had deliberately chosen over the bigger, more impressive conference rooms. There was a whiteboard on one wall, covered in what appeared to be a market analysis written in handwriting so small and dense it looked like a different language. A half-empty coffee mug sat on the table. A laptop was open, screen dark. Celine Cross was already there when Nolan knocked on the open door. She was positioned at the head of the table, her wheelchair angled slightly toward the window, and she looked up when he came in with an expression that gave away exactly nothing. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Sit." He sat, across the table from her, one seat to the left of center, because sitting directly across from someone in a situation like this felt too much like an interrogation. Celine looked at him for a moment. Not unkindly, just directly. The way she'd looked at the whole room during orientation, except now it was just him. "That text," she said. "Did you mean it?" Nolan opened his mouth, closed it. "I'm not asking for a reason that's going to get you fired," she said. "I'm asking because I've been in this company for 7 years, and I've had approximately 400 people look at me with approximately the same expression, the one where they're trying to figure out how to be normal around someone in a wheelchair, and not one of them has ever accidentally revealed what they actually thought of me before they had time to filter it." She said it without any particular bitterness. Factually. "So," she said, "did you mean it?" Nolan looked at her. "Yes," he said. The silence lasted about 4 seconds. "Okay," Celine said. Then she reached for her coffee mug, realized it was cold, and set it back down with a small sound of disgust. "You're on the analytics team. Hector Marsh is your direct supervisor. He's good at his job and bad at conflict. So if you ever have a problem you need escalated, figure out whether you can solve it yourself first." Nolan blinked. That's it? What were you expecting?" "Honestly, I thought you were going to fire me." "I considered it," Celine said, "but your interview scores were the highest we've seen in that position in 2 years, and good analysts are hard to find. I decided a text message sent to the wrong number wasn't worth losing someone competent over." She said it practically. But there was something at the very edge of it, something small, that was something else entirely. Nolan recognized it because he knew it from his own face, in mirrors, in the years since his divorce. It was the expression of someone who had been called a lot of things by a lot of people, and had stopped expecting to be called something that surprised them. He didn't say any of that. What he said was, "Thank you." Celine nodded once. "Don't send any more personal texts from company contacts." "I won't," he said. He stood up to leave. "Pierce said," she said. He stopped. "The friend you were updating," she said. "Tell him the intel was accurate." She had already turned back to her laptop by the time he reached the door. But Nolan had not intended to think about Celine Cross when he got home that evening. He had a very full life that kept him from thinking about things that didn't immediately require his attention, and most of those things were concentrated in a small apartment on the west side of the city, and specifically in one 7-year-old named Iris, who had her mother's eyes and his stubborn streak and an absolute refusal to eat anything green unless it was a popsicle. "Daddy." "Iris." "There's no food." "There's food. We established this last week. Food exists in the refrigerator." Iris crossed her arms. She was wearing one sock. "There's no good food. I'm going to order pizza." The one sock situation disappeared immediately into another room, and Nolan heard the sound of small feet running across the apartment floor before her bedroom door banged open, and he could hear her talking to her stuffed animals with the kind of urgency usually reserved for press conferences. He stood in the kitchen for a moment and just breathed. The apartment was small. It was clean because he made himself keep it clean, because the alternative was chaos, and chaos was the one thing he couldn't afford. 2 bedrooms, a kitchen that shared space with the living room, a bathroom where Iris had accumulated 14 different kinds of bath toys that took up approximately 60% of the available floor space. He had moved here a little over 4 years ago, after Emily left. Left was the word Nolan used with Iris because she was 7, and she didn't need the complicated version yet. The complicated version was that Emily had been trying to leave for about a year before she actually left. That she'd said things in the last few months of their marriage that Nolan still turned over in his head sometimes like stones. Not to punish himself, but because he still wasn't entirely sure what to do with them. She'd said he was closed off, that he'd stopped letting her in somewhere around year 2, and she'd spent years knocking on a door that was already open, but that he somehow couldn't see. He hadn't understood it then. He was starting to understand it now. His phone buzzed. Marcus. So how did orientation go? Did you see the CEO? Did she live up to the hype? Nolan typed back. I accidentally texted her instead of you. 3 seconds. What the text? The one I sent you about her. Nolan James Pierce. I know. What happened? She called me to her office and then basically told me I still have the job and to never do it again. That's it? That's it. A longer pause. Is she actually stunning, though? Nolan looked at his phone, put it face down on the counter, ordered the pizza. He thought about the way Celine had looked at him across that small table. Not with warmth exactly, not the kind that gets performed, but with a directness that he hadn't encountered in a long time. The kind that meant, I am looking at you. Not around you, not past you, at you. He thought about what she'd said. Tell him the intel was accurate. His phone buzzed again. Marcus? Nolan? Marcus. Nolan. Marcus. I need a verbal confirmation. My guy Nolan picked up the phone. Yeah, he typed. She is. The first 3 weeks at Vertex were, professionally speaking, the most engaging Nolan had worked in years. He had spent the previous 2 years at a mid-size financial firm where the data team was good but not hungry. People who were comfortable, who had found a speed that worked for them and had no particular interest in going faster. Nolan had found himself doing work that was technically proficient and completely unstimulating, staying late, not because there was more to do, but because he didn't know what else to do with himself once Iris was asleep. Vertex was different. The projects were complicated in ways that were actually interesting. The systems had problems that weren't obvious until you looked at them sideways. And the culture, under the surface of polished offices and quarterly revenue charts, ran on a specific kind of competitive energy that Nolan recognized immediately. These were people who cared about being right, not in a territorial way, but in the way of people who had been hired specifically because they had opinions and were expected to defend them. He thrived in it almost immediately, which surprised him a little. Hector Marsh turned out to be exactly what Celine had described. Excellent analyst, conflict-averse to a fault. He had a habit of phrasing criticism as questions, which Nolan had figured out by day 3. Do you think maybe the variance here could use more support? Meant this needs more support. Nolan started answering his own questions before Hector could ask them, and Hector responded to this by looking visibly relieved every time it happened. He saw Celine rarely. She ran the company from an executive floor that wasn't inaccessible, but wasn't exactly casual either. People didn't go up to the 14th floor unless they were summoned, or they had a very good reason. Nolan saw her twice in the elevator, and once at the end of a meeting she'd come to observe. Each time she acknowledged him the way she acknowledged everyone. A brief, direct look. Nothing performative about it. He told himself this was fine. It was fine. On the 22nd day he was working late. Iris was at his mother's, one of the nights per week his mother took her when she was feeling well enough, which was becoming less frequent, and he'd lost track of time in a way that only happened when a problem was finally starting to cooperate. He was in one of the open work areas on the 12th floor, his laptop open, a half-dozen browser tabs arranged across 2 monitors, a coffee that had gone cold 3 hours ago sitting on the edge of the desk. He heard the soft sound of a wheelchair on the floor before he saw her. "You're still here," Celine said. He looked up. She was crossing through the otherwise empty floor, jacket still on, which meant she hadn't gone home either. Her expression was the default expression, considering something. He'd started to think of it that way, like her face was always in the middle of a sentence. "The migration data has a gap in the 3rd quarter reporting," he said. "If I submit it the way it is, Hector's going to find it Tuesday, and it's going to look like I missed it." "Did you miss it?" "I found it at 6:30. She moved to look at his monitors, stopping a few feet away. He angled the screen slightly so she could see better, and she leaned forward. A quiet moment while she looked. "The date range is wrong," she said. "The third quarter pull is including 2 weeks of Q4. Nolan looked at the code, looked again. "You're right," he said. He felt the specific low-grade embarrassment of having missed something that turned out to be simpler than he thought. "I've been staring at this for 3 hours. "That's the problem," she said. "Fresh eyes. It's faster to call it a night and fix it in the morning than to spin on it." "I know. I'm aware of that principle. But you're still here." "But I'm still here," he agreed. She almost smiled. It wasn't quite a smile, more like something that moved through her expression and then decided against committing. But it changed her face for just a second, and Nolan noticed it the way you notice something that you weren't expecting and then afterward can't stop thinking about. "I'll let you get back to it," she said. "You're leaving?" "Eventually." She moved toward the window, and he realized she was just there, not leaving yet, not doing anything in particular. Just standing at the window, the city below lit up in the dark, looking at it. Nolan turned back to his screen, fixed the date range in about 4 minutes, closed his laptop. He should have left. He knew that. Instead, he said, "You're still here too." "I live here," Celine said. Then, when he looked up, "Not literally. I have an apartment, but sometimes it feels that way." "Do you like it?" he asked. "The work?" She looked at him. "You mean, do I only do it because I have to?" "No," he said. "I mean, do you actually like it? Because some people who are good at something don't actually like it. They just find it easier than the alternatives." Another one of those almost smiles. More definite this time. "That's a strange question for a junior analyst to ask the CEO. "I'm aware. I do like it," she said. "I like building things. I like the problem of it. I don't always like the surrounding parts." "The surrounding parts meaning what?" "Rooms," she said. "Politics. The way people talk around what they mean because they're worried about what I'll think." She paused. "How long have you been at Vertex?" 22 days. "You don't do that, the talking around things." "I sent you a text accidentally calling you stunning on day 1, Nolan said. "I think I burned through all my impulse control in the first hour." This time she actually laughed. Not loudly. It was a short sound, surprised out of her. But it was real. And it made something in Nolan's chest do a thing he was not going to examine closely. "Go home, Pierce," she said. "Fix the date range in the morning." "I already fixed it." "Of course you did." She turned back toward the elevator bank. "Good night." "Good night," he said. He sat in the empty office for another 10 minutes, not doing anything in particular. Then he went home. He should explain about his mother. Her name was Carol Pierce. Carol to her friends, Mom to Nolan, and Grammy to Iris, who had decided at age 4 that Grandma was insufficiently dramatic and had selected an alternative. She was 61 years old, which was not old, which was the part that kept ambushing Nolan when he wasn't paying attention. The diagnosis had come 18 months ago, ovarian cancer, caught late. Not the worst prognosis they could have received, but not the version where someone pats your hand and says we got it early. The version where you learned words like staging and immunotherapy and spent a long time on the phone with insurance companies while your daughter watched cartoons in the next room and your mother sat at your kitchen table telling you she wasn't worried. She just needed more tea. Carol Pierce had never been a woman who was worried. Nolan had spent 32 years watching her turn the scariest things into logistics problems. When his father left, Nolan was 9. Iris would someday be told a version of this story. His mother had looked at the household budget, made 3 phone calls, picked up a second job doing bookkeeping for 2 small businesses, and never once let Nolan see her cry about it. He'd loved her for it and resented it a little too. She had made strength look like the only option, which meant Nolan had never entirely figured out what to do when he needed to be something else. The treatment was expensive in ways that the insurance coverage was not. The financial gap was not catastrophic. It was the other kind, the kind that slowly removes all margin, all breathing room, until you're making the math work but only barely, and barely feels like it's always one car repair or one missed shift away from not working at all. He had taken the Vertex job partly because the salary was 30% higher than his previous position, and 30% meant the difference between managing and stable. He had not told anyone at Vertex this. It was not their business. He visited his mother every Sunday. Iris came with him when she wasn't at her own activities. She had started a Saturday soccer program that consumed her completely, and which she described to anyone who asked in approximately 400 words. The Sundays were good. The Sundays were the part of the week Nolan was able to breathe in completely. His mother always asked about work. He always said it was good. She always asked if he'd met anyone. He always said no, Mom. She always gave him a look that meant she didn't believe him. He had started lying better, but she had started looking harder and they were roughly even. One Sunday in late October, she said, "You've got something going on." "Work is busy," he said. "That's not the kind of busy I mean." She had her tea. He had coffee. Iris was in the backyard kicking a soccer ball at the fence with the focused intensity of a child who had recently decided she was going to be professional and was treating every available surface as a training ground. There's a different kind of busy, the kind where you're thinking about something when you think no one's watching. "Mom." "I'm not prying," she said, which was a thing she said before she pried. "There's nothing to tell." Carol Pierce looked at her son over the rim of her mug. "Okay," she said mildly. He lasted about 40 seconds. "She runs the company," he said. "She's the CEO. And I don't know. She's not what I expected. She's difficult to read, but when you get a read on her, He stopped. "She's what?" his mother asked, carefully. "Different," he said. "She says what she means." "As opposed to?" "As opposed to everyone else." His mother nodded slowly. She had the particular stillness of a woman who had learned over many decades that the best thing to do when someone was finally telling you something true was to make as little noise as possible so they didn't stop. "She's also my CEO," Nolan said. So, his mother agreed. "So there's nothing. We've talked a few times. It's professional." "Of course." "Mom." "I said of course, Nolan." She said it pleasantly. He let it go. But walking home that evening, Iris asleep in her car seat in the back of his old Civic, the city going by outside the window, he thought about the word different, about how he'd lived in a small, controlled world for 4 years. His daughter, his work, his mother, the very careful management of everything in between. About how he hadn't felt off balance in a long time. About the fact that he wasn't sure whether off balance was bad. But the business trip happened 6 weeks into his time at Vertex. It was announced in a Monday morning email as Partnership Development, Portland, 3 days. The team going was small. Nolan, a senior analyst named Dana, who had worked at Vertex for 4 years and communicated primarily through annotated spreadsheets, and Celine. Nolan saw her name in the email and felt the very specific feeling of something clicking into place that you hadn't realized was misaligned. He texted Marcus that night. "I'm going on a business trip to Portland with Celine Cross." Marcus. "With the CEO, yes, alone." "With Dana from Analytics." Also Nolan. "This is either nothing or a movie. It's a business trip. Sure, let me know how the movie goes." He did not let Marcus know anything, because Marcus would make it something, and it wasn't something. It was 3 days in Portland, finalizing a partnership with a company called Meridian Systems that would significantly expand Vertex's data infrastructure and which Nolan had been chosen for because he'd done the underlying analysis and knew it better than anyone. He reminded himself of this on the drive to the airport, at the check-in counter, at the gate. He was still reminding himself when he saw Celine at the gate, seated near the window, a laptop open, the same considering expression she wore pretty much everywhere. She'd packed lighter than he expected. She was wearing a dark sweater instead of a blazer, and it made her look less like a CEO and more like a person, which was somehow more alarming. She looked up when he sat down 2 seats away. "Pierce." "Morning," he said. "Dana's flight from Chicago connects here. She lands in 40 minutes. "Okay." Celine went back to her laptop. Nolan got out his headphones. He didn't put them in. The flight was 3 hours. Dana arrived at the gate with 12 minutes to spare, out of breath, carrying a tote bag covered in data visualization stickers that Nolan found inexplicably endearing. She was around 50, brisk and competent, and she greeted Celine the way someone greets a person they've worked with for 4 years, comfortably, without ceremony, asking immediately about a projection model they'd apparently been arguing about for 2 weeks. Nolan listened to them argue about it for the entire boarding process and a significant portion of the flight. He contributed twice, both times to Celine's side, both times because he thought she was right. The second time, Dana looked at him with what he could only describe as analytical reassessment, like she was updating a spreadsheet in her head. "You've been at Vertex 6 weeks," she said. 5.5. "And you're taking her side." "He's right," Celine said, not looking up from her screen. Dana considered this. "Okay," she said, apparently satisfied. She went back to her own laptop. Nolan caught Celine's expression. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one, and looked away before he could think too much about it. But the Meridian meetings went long. They went long in the way of negotiations that are mostly settled, but where someone on the other side keeps having one more concern that is always about something slightly different than what they said it was about, which usually means the real concern is something else entirely, and no one is going to say what it is out loud until someone runs out of patience, or caffeine, or both. By the second day late afternoon, Nolan had identified the real concern. A Meridian VP named Gerald Chen, who was worried that the partnership would eliminate his division's autonomy. He was raising infrastructure objections that were technically valid but weren't the actual point. He walked Celine through it over dinner, the three of them at a hotel restaurant, Dana having ordered a glass of wine and visibly settling in for what she described as post-battle carbs. "If you approach it as a structural integration problem, he's going to keep finding reasons," Nolan said. "But if you reframe it as an autonomy preservation question, if the agreement explicitly protects his division's decision-making authority on anything below the infrastructure level, he stops fighting the infrastructure," Celine said. "Right. And he looks like he won something." "He did win something." Celine was quiet for a moment. "When did you figure this out?" "Hour 2, day 1, he said. "Why didn't you say something?" "Because I'm 5 weeks in and it wasn't my read to offer without being asked." She looked at him. "You can offer reads. You don't need to wait to be asked." "Now I know." Dana looked between them over her pasta and said nothing. The third night was different. The Meridian issue had resolved. Celine had taken Nolan's reframe into the morning session, and Gerald Chen had walked out looking, as predicted, like he'd won something. Dana had caught a red-eye back to Chicago because she had a family thing she didn't explain, and had packed with the efficiency of someone who had done this many times, which meant Nolan and Celine were the only ones at dinner. He'd almost offered to eat alone or order room service, something that would give them the professional distance that, technically, officially, they were supposed to be maintaining. But she'd said the hotel restaurant is fine in a tone that suggested she didn't consider there to be a question, and Nolan had gone along with it because he was becoming increasingly aware that he wasn't very good at doing the sensible thing when it came to her. The restaurant was quiet on a Wednesday night. Good food, not particularly fancy. Celine had a glass of red wine. Nolan stuck to water because he had the early checkout and knew from experience that wine on business trips hit differently. For the first half hour, they talked about Vertex, the partnership, what the next quarter would look like, safe territory. Then Celine said, out of nowhere, "You have a daughter." He looked up. "Yeah, how did you have a photo on your desk, curly hair, missing a front tooth." "Iris," he said. "She's 7, He stopped, because he always stopped here. Not because he didn't want to talk about Iris, but because the moment he started, he genuinely could not stop, and he had learned over the years that not everyone wanted the full version. "She's a lot. A lot good or a lot hard?" "Both," he said. "Constantly and at the same time." Celine turned her wine glass slowly. "Just you?" "Her mom's in Seattle. It's been 4 years, joint custody on paper. In practice, Iris is mostly with me." He said it the way he'd learned to say it, matter of fact, no editorializing, because editorializing didn't help anything. That's a lot to manage. It is, he said. And then, because she had said it without pity, which meant it was safe to be honest, I'd manage it differently if I could go back. I wasn't great at being married. I was present in the ways that were easy and absent in the ways that mattered, and I spent a lot of time not understanding the difference. He hadn't said that out loud to very many people. The words felt strange in his mouth. Not bad strange, the other kind. Celine looked at him. She wasn't doing the face, the concerned, careful face that people made when you said something personal and they were trying to figure out the correct amount of empathy to display. She was just listening. "Does Iris know?" she said. "Not the whole thing. She knows I messed some stuff up. Kids know more than we think they do." "Yeah," Celine said, quietly. A pause. "The accident," he said, carefully, not because he was afraid to ask, but because he wanted to get the asking right. "That's public record. I read about the company when I was applying. You don't have to talk about it." "I know I don't have to," she said. "What do you want to know?" "I was going to ask how long ago." 8 years. I was 22. Car accident. 3 surgeries, 2 years of rehab, and eventually someone very carefully explained to me that the damage to my spinal cord was permanent and that I needed to decide what to do with that information. She said it the same way he'd talked about his marriage. Matter of fact. Not because it didn't matter, but because she'd had years to carry it and had decided how she wanted to carry it. "What did you decide?" he asked. "To build something," she said. "I'd already started Vertex before the accident. It was small then, basically me and 4 people in a rented office. I had a choice between spending 2 more years recovering in a way that tried to get back to what I'd been before, or deciding that what I'd been before wasn't the best version of me anyway." She paused. "I'm not saying it was that clean. It wasn't. There were years that were genuinely bad. I'm just telling you what I decided eventually." "How do people react to you now?" he asked. "The ones who haven't met you before." "Depends on the person." She held his gaze. "Some of them can't get past it. They look at the wheelchair and they can't hear anything else. Some of them try too hard in the other direction. They treat me like I'm fragile and they're performing open-mindedness. And some of them—" She stopped. "Some of them what?" he said. "Some of them just look at me," she said, "like it's part of it, not the whole thing." Nolan didn't say anything. He didn't think she needed him to. They sat with that for a moment. The restaurant around them was quiet. Someone in the kitchen was having an argument with someone else in the kitchen, muffled through the wall. "I should tell you something," Celine said. "Okay." "When I got that text—" She stopped, tried again. "I'd had a very bad day. The week before you started. A board member had made a comment in a meeting about whether the company was, how he phrased it was, properly managed. He wasn't specific. He didn't have to be." Nolan went still. "And then 45 minutes into orientation for a new hire class, I got a text from a stranger who'd accidentally sent me the most genuinely human thing anyone had said about me in months." She looked at the table, not with sadness exactly, with something more complicated. "I didn't call you to my office to fire you." "I know," he said. "I called you because I wanted to see what kind of person sends a text like that." He looked at her across the table, the low restaurant light, the half-empty wine glass, her hands resting on the table, quiet. "What kind of person is it?" he asked. "I'm still figuring that out," she said. She meant it as an ending, he thought. The period at the end of the sentence, before they went back to being professional, to being what they were supposed to be in the context of their respective job titles, and the very clear practical reality of the situation. He understood that. He walked her to the elevator when they left the restaurant. She pressed the button for her floor. He pressed his. They stood next to each other in the small space, and neither of them said anything. When the elevator opened at her floor, she moved through the doors and then stopped. "Pierce," she said. "Yeah." She looked at him from the other side of the threshold, and something in her face was different from the careful, considered expression she wore like armor most of the time. It wasn't soft exactly. It was more like unguarded. "For 1 second, you're not what I expected either," she said. The doors closed. Nolan rode the rest of the way to his floor and stood in the corridor for a long moment. He thought about Iris at his mother's apartment, probably asleep by now. He thought about what his mother had said. There's a different kind of busy. He unlocked his hotel room door. He didn't call Marcus. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while and didn't think about anything in particular. He thought about everything. They flew back on Thursday morning. At the airport, waiting at the gate, Celine was reading something on her tablet and Nolan was getting coffee. He brought her one without asking, the way he'd learned she took it, and set it on the arm of the chair beside her. She looked at it, looked at him, didn't say anything, picked it up and went back to reading. Nolan sat down, put in his headphones. He almost smiled. They didn't talk about Portland when they got back. Not directly. Not in any way that acknowledged what the trip had become by the third night. That quiet shift over dinner, the elevator doors closing, the coffee at the gate that neither of them commented on. They returned to Vertex on a Thursday, and by Friday morning everything looked exactly the same as it had before they left. And Nolan was beginning to understand that this was how Celine operated. She would let something be true, and then she would put it back in its drawer and return to work. And if you were smart, you would do the same. He was trying to be smart. It helped that there was a lot of work. The Meridian partnership had closed cleanly. Gerald Chen's division autonomy clause had gone in exactly as Nolan had suggested, and the signed agreement had come through Tuesday afternoon, which meant a round of internal meetings to begin the integration planning. Nolan was pulled into 3 of those meetings in his first week back, which was unusual for someone at his level, and which Hector mentioned with a careful neutrality that meant he'd noticed and wasn't sure what to do with the noticing. Celine requested you specifically, Hector said, on a Wednesday morning, passing Nolan's desk with a coffee and a slightly bewildered expression. For the Meridian Integration Steering Committee. That's not typical for someone 8 weeks in. Okay, Nolan said. I'm not saying anything. I know you're not, Hector. I just think it's worth knowing. I appreciate it. Hector nodded, still looking slightly bewildered, and went back to his office. Nolan looked at his monitor for a moment. He thought about saying something else, some piece of context that would make Hector's bewilderment less uncomfortable, and decided against it, because there wasn't a version of that context that came out clean. He went to the steering committee meeting. Celine ran it with the same clipped efficiency she brought to everything, and she called on him twice, and neither time was there anything in her voice that suggested he was anything other than the analyst who had done the Meridian groundwork. Which he was. That was true. He reminded himself of this. It was true. On the drive home that evening, Marcus called. Status report, Marcus said by way of greeting. On what? Don't be annoying, on the CEO situation. There's no situation. Nolan, you went on a 3-day business trip alone with her, with Dana also. And you came back and you've said literally nothing about it, which is how I know something happened. Nolan changed lanes. The evening traffic was doing its usual thing, the interstate moving in that slow accordion way that meant he'd be home in 40 minutes minimum. We had dinner, he said. You had dinner. The last night, Dana caught an early flight. We talked. A pause. About what? About things. Her accident, my divorce, Iris. He paused. It was 2 hours and neither of us was performing. Performing? You know what I mean, when you're talking to someone and you're saying the right things in the right order and everyone's comfortable, but nothing's actually... He stopped. Landing, Marcus said. Yeah. Another pause, longer this time. When Marcus spoke again, his voice had shifted from the one he used when he was trying to extract gossip to the one he used when he was being actual Marcus. Nolan. I know. She's your CEO. I know, Marcus. Like, not just your boss, the CEO of the whole company. I'm aware of the org chart. I'm not trying to... Marcus stopped, started again. I just don't want you to get into something that gets complicated. You've got a lot going on already. Nothing is going on. Something is going on. Nolan watched the highway. A truck merged into his lane too close, and he tapped the brakes without thinking. I'm not going to do anything stupid, he said. No, Marcus agreed. You're going to do something very thoughtful and careful that still ends up complicated. Nolan didn't answer because Marcus wasn't entirely wrong. He got home at 7:50. Iris was at the kitchen table with homework. She'd started second grade in September, and second grade had introduced the concept of actual homework, which Iris had processed as a personal affront to her time management and spent 2 weeks protesting before grudgingly accepting. She looked up when he came in. Dad. Iris. Can the letter Q have a tail, or does it have to not have a tail? Nolan dropped his bag, sat down beside her, and looked at the page. The letter Q in question was a masterpiece of ambiguity, somewhere between cursive and print, the tail present but uncertain about its commitment. Both are valid, he said. Mrs. Okafor said it had to have a tail. Then give it a tail. But I already made some without tails. Then those ones are done. Iris looked at the page, looked at him, made a sound that communicated deep dissatisfaction with the inflexibility of the situation, then picked up her pencil and put tails on 3 more letters with the focused aggression of someone making a point. Nolan went to make dinner. He stood at the stove and watched the pan heat up and thought about nothing for a few minutes, which was the closest he got most days to actual rest. Dad? Iris said from the table. Is Grammy going to get better? He turned down the heat. He turned around. Iris was still looking at her homework, pencil in hand, asking in the casual way of children who are actually asking seriously. The side door approach. The question that comes in sideways because the front door is too scary. The doctors are working on it, he said, carefully. But is she going to get better? He crossed to the table and sat down. Iris looked up. Her eyes were Emily's eyes, dark brown, slightly wide-set, exactly the wrong eyes to try to be dishonest at. I don't know yet, he said. That's the honest answer. She's getting treatment, and the treatment is helping. We're going to keep helping her, and the doctors are going to keep working, and we're going to see. Iris absorbed this. I don't like not knowing, she said. Me either. Can I call her tonight? Yeah, he said. After dinner. Iris nodded and went back to the letter Q situation. Nolan went back to the stove. He listened to his daughter add tails to letters, and he thought about his mother's face the last Sunday, how she'd looked more tired than she usually let herself look. And he did what he'd gotten very good at over the past 18 months. He took the thing that scared him, and he put it somewhere he could manage it, and the part of himself where the things he couldn't control were stored, and he went back to making dinner. He was good at that. He was maybe too good at it. The weeks after Portland had a particular quality to them, a charged ordinariness, if that was a thing that could exist. On the surface, everything was exactly what it was supposed to be. Nolan worked. He picked up Iris from after school. He visited his mother on Sundays and listened to her not complain about the side effects of the immunotherapy and helped her with the crossword she did every morning and had done every morning for as long as he could remember. Underneath the surface, he was aware of Celine Cross in the specific way you become aware of something you have been trying not to think about, which is to say, constantly and with the slightly exhausting quality of sustained effort. They interacted regularly now. The Meridian integration had created legitimate reasons to communicate. Meetings that Hector attended half the time and then didn't, conversations that started about data architecture and sometimes extended into other things. Those small sideways moments that Nolan was becoming fluent in reading even as he told himself he wasn't. She sent him a model she'd built at 11:30 on a Tuesday night with a note that said, "See what I did with the variance weights." He sent back 4 comments and a revision, and the note, "You were right about the weights, wrong about the time lag." She sent back, "The time lag issue is a known problem." He sent, "Then why'd you leave it in?" She sent, "To see if you'd catch it." He sat with his phone for a full minute after that. He did not tell Marcus. Ugh. The Thursday that everything changed was the kind of Thursday that gave no warning. There was nothing about it that announced itself as significant. Nolan had been at Vertex for 11 weeks. He had a 3 o'clock with the integration team and a report due by end of day that he was going to finish comfortably. Hector was in a good mood because the previous quarter's numbers had come in strong, and when Hector was in a good mood, he brought donuts, so there were donuts. He ran into Celine in the lobby at 8:47 in the morning, not on the 14th floor, not in a meeting, not in the elevator going up. In the lobby, coming in from outside, which meant she'd been somewhere before the office, and was arriving later than her usual 7:15. She was in a dark coat, one he hadn't seen before, and she looked tired in a way she usually didn't let show. "Morning," he said. "Pierce?" She pressed the elevator button. He stood beside her. "You're early. Report due today. I wanted a head start." The elevator came. They got in. She pressed 14, he pressed 12. "You all right?" he said. She looked at the doors. "Board meeting yesterday evening. How was it?" A brief silence. "Informative," she said. He didn't push it. The elevator moved. He thought about the board member she'd told him about in Portland, properly managed, and about the way she'd said it, carefully flat, the words held at a certain distance. "Celine," he said. She looked at him. "If it ever—" He stopped. Restarted. "If there's ever something it would help to think through. I'm good at the analysis side. I know that's probably not—" "I know," she said. "I'm not trying to—" "Nolan." She used his first name. She didn't do that often, and each time she did it, it was a slightly different thing. This time it was quieter than usual, and it landed differently because of that. "I know." The elevator stopped at 12. He stepped out. The doors closed. He stood in the corridor for exactly 3 seconds before his brain caught up to the fact that she'd just used his first name for the second time ever, and the way she'd said it was the way you say someone's name when you want them to understand something you can't quite put into a full sentence yet. He went to his desk. He opened his laptop. He told himself to focus on the report. 2 Fridays later, Iris had a soccer game. It was an 8-year-old recreational league game, which meant it was located on a muddy field at a park near the elementary school, and it would involve approximately 45 minutes of loosely organized chaos, at least one child crying about something unrelated to soccer, and a level of parental enthusiasm entirely out of proportion to the actual stakes. Nolan loved these games with a completeness he could never quite explain to people who didn't have kids, the way they reset something in him. Here was a thing that mattered not because of money or career or any of the adult machinery he managed all week, but because Iris was running across wet grass in cleats 2 sizes too big, and her face was the face of someone completely and utterly in what she was doing. She scored once. She also, in the second half, got the ball confused with a ball from the adjacent field and dribbled it in the wrong direction for approximately 20 feet before her teammate redirected her. And the whole thing was so earnest and so completely without self-consciousness that Nolan found himself laughing, really laughing, the kind that comes from the middle of you, for the first time in a while. His mother was there. She'd insisted, despite the cold, despite the fact that she'd had treatment Tuesday and was still carrying the tiredness of it. She sat in the folding chair he'd brought for her, wrapped in a coat and a scarf, and she watched Iris with the particular expression she had when something made her happy, but she was also aware of how much she loved it. "She's got your stubbornness," his mother said, after Iris went after a ball with a determination that was frankly alarming in a 7-year-old. "I know," Nolan said. "That's a compliment." "I know it is." His mother looked at him sideways. She'd been doing that all morning. The sideways look, the quiet calibration. He'd been waiting for whatever was coming. "Tell me about this woman," she said. "Mom? I'm not starting anything. I'm asking." He watched Iris sprint toward the opposite goal. "There's nothing happening." "You're a bad liar." "There's nothing happening that I've done anything about," he said. "Okay," Carol Pierce said. "But what is she like?" Nolan was quiet for a moment. On the field, Iris collided mildly with a teammate and they both bounced off each other and kept going. "She built something real," he said, "from scratch mostly. And she's honest. Not brutal honest, just she doesn't perform. She says what she means, or she doesn't say anything, and you can tell the difference, and that's—" He stopped. "That's rare," his mother said. "Yeah." "And she sees you." Nolan looked at her. "What?" Carol Pierce was still watching the field. "Some people look at you, and they're seeing themselves, or they're seeing something they need from you, or they're seeing who they think you should be. And some people just see you. That's what you're describing." He didn't answer. "Is she kind?" his mother asked. He thought about it honestly. Kindness wasn't the first word he'd reach for, but the more he turned it over, The more he thought, yes, just not in the obvious way, in the way of someone who has been hurt enough times to understand exactly how hurt happens and chooses not to do it. Yeah, he said. She is. His mother nodded once, satisfied, and went back to watching her granddaughter play soccer. The photos appeared on a Monday. He didn't see them first. He saw them second. He saw Marcus's text first at 7:03 in the morning, which read, "Nolan, call me before you get to the office." And then when he was in the car, he read the second text. "There's a story, corporate blog thing, photos from Portland." He pulled over. It was a gossip-adjacent tech industry blog that had a readership mostly within the sector, the kind of thing that traded in corporate drama and executive speculation, written with the practiced implication of knowing more than it said. The headline was, "Vertex CEO's new favorite analyst, talent or something more." The photos were from the restaurant on the third night. Nolan didn't know how, a phone at a nearby table or the restaurant itself. But there were three of them, grainy and shot from an angle that caught them leaning toward each other in the way two people lean when they've forgotten there's a room around them. In one of them, Celine was looking at him with the unguarded expression, the one he'd thought was just for that second. And in the context of a photograph under that headline, it meant something that was both true and entirely wrong at the same time. The article itself was careful in the specific way of things designed to imply without accusing. It mentioned Nolan's rapid inclusion in the Meridian Steering Committee. It mentioned the business trip. It said sources close to the company suggest which could mean anything, and it raised the question, delicately, precisely, of whether Vertex's CEO was allowing personal entanglement to influence professional decisions. Nolan sat in his car for 4 minutes. Then he drove to work. The office already knew. He could feel it the way you can feel weather, something in the air pressure of the place, the way conversations paused or adjusted when he walked through. Hector met him at his desk with the expression of a man who had been hoping very hard that a problem would solve itself and had just been informed that it would not. "I saw it," Nolan said. "The board has already—" Hector stopped. "There's been some communication from above." "I understand. You're not— I want you to know you're not in trouble with me, or with anyone on the team." "I know, Hector. Thank you." He sat at his desk. He opened his laptop. He looked at the screen for a while without seeing it. His phone buzzed. Not Marcus this time. Celine Cross. "Are you in?" "Yes, come up when you can." He took the elevator to 14. He sat in 1402. Their room, he'd started thinking of it that way without meaning to, and waited. She came in 7 minutes later and she looked exactly like she always looked, which meant she looked like someone managing something from the inside. She sat down. She didn't open with anything indirect. "I need you to tell me what you want to do," she said. "About what?" "Don't—" She stopped, softened slightly, or not softened, modulated. "I'm not going to manage this for you. I can control what happens at the company level, but I can't tell you how to feel about it." "I'm not worried about me," he said. She looked at him. "The story is questioning your judgment," he said. "That's what it's actually doing. Everything else it's a vehicle for that." "I'm aware." "So what do you want to do?" She turned the question back without hesitation. "What would you do?" "If I were you?" He thought about it honestly. "Nothing, right now. Reacting publicly makes it larger. Let it sit for a week and see what it does on its own. And if it doesn't go away, then you have a harder decision about how public you want to be." A pause. "And you," she said, carefully. "What about me? How public do you want to be? About what this is?" He looked at her. She was holding herself very still with the quality she had when she was not going to let herself need the answer she was waiting for. "What is it?" he said. A long moment. "I don't know yet," she said. It wasn't a rejection. He knew her well enough to know it wasn't that. It was the most honest answer she had, which was its own thing. He nodded. "Then we figure it out," he said, without the pressure of a gossip blog telling us what it is before we do. Something in her shoulders changed. Not relaxed exactly, but released a degree, a small one. Okay, she said. He stood to leave. Nolan, she said. He stopped. She was looking at the table. I'm sorry you're in the middle of this. I'm not, he said. She looked up. I'm exactly where I put myself, he said. That's different from being in the middle of something. He left before she could answer. He went back down to 12 and sat at his desk and did not accomplish a single meaningful thing for the rest of the morning. But that, he figured, was fair. Celine's prediction turned out to be half right. The story did get smaller over the first few days. It cycled through the usual industry channels, got picked up by two larger tech publications who treated it as a minor footnote rather than a feature, and by Wednesday of that week it had mostly stopped generating new commentary. The internet had a short attention span for everything that wasn't actively on fire. The board did not have a short attention span. Nolan found this out not from Celine but from Dana, who called him on a Wednesday evening. Dana, who had been back in Chicago since Portland and who communicated primarily by email, the kind of person who treated phone calls as emergency measures. I'm going to tell you something, Dana said, and I want you to know I'm not telling you because I think you're going to do anything stupid. I'm telling you because you should know. Okay, Nolan said. He was standing at his kitchen counter. Iris was in her room. The apartment had the particular quiet of a child who had gone silent in a way that could mean sleep, or could mean elaborate, unsupervised project. Victor Hale had a private call with 3 other board members last Tuesday, Dana said. I know this because Victor Hale is not subtle, and the assistant who schedules his calls has been at Vertex longer than Victor Hale, and she mentioned it to someone who mentioned it to me. Victor Hale was the board member who had made the properly managed comment. Nolan had never met him in person. He existed, from Nolan's perspective, as a name on memos and a faint chill in Celine's voice on the rare occasion she mentioned him. What was the call about? Nolan said. The story, and whether recent events suggested the company needed, and I'm quoting what I was told, a review of executive leadership capacity. Nolan was quiet. They're not moving yet, Dana said. This is early positioning. But Victor Hale has wanted to move Celine out for 2 years, and this is the closest he's had to a reason. She built this company. I know she did. She took it from 4 people in a rented office to Nolan. Dana's voice was even. I know all of that. So does Celine. So does the board, technically. None of that is actually what this is about, and you know that. He did know that. He just needed a second to be angry about it before he knew it. What does she know? He asked. She knows Victor called a meeting. She knows the shape of it. She's been here before, not this specific version, but versions of it. A pause. She's not going to ask for help. I know. I'm not suggesting you offer any. Donna. I'm suggesting, she said carefully, that you make sure you're doing your own thinking clearly about what you want, because the problem with this story isn't the story. The story goes away. The problem is that Victor Hale now has a narrative, and narratives don't need to be true to do damage. They just need to be available. After she hung up, Nolan stood at the counter for a long time. Then he checked on Iris, who was in fact asleep, curled around 3 stuffed animals with the deeply committed sleep of a child who had probably exhausted herself. And he went and sat on the couch in the dark and thought about what it meant to be available. The narrative, he understood, was this: that Nolan Pierce had come into Vertex and gotten close to the CEO and gotten pulled up the ladder faster than his tenure warranted, and maybe the CEO's judgment had been affected by something other than professional assessment. It didn't have to be true. It just had to be available whenever someone wanted to use it. And the thing was, and this was the part that kept snagging, kept pulling, the thing was that the narrative had a true piece buried in it. Not the piece about his intentions or his work, but the piece about what was between him and Celine. That was real. Whatever it was, that was real. And that realness was what gave the lie its power, because the lie was close enough to something true that defending against it felt like lying in the other direction. He called Marcus. I need to think out loud, he said. Go, Marcus said. No jokes. He could tell from Nolan's voice. If I stay, Nolan said, I'm a story about her judgment. Every time anything goes sideways at that company, I'm the evidence that she's compromised. That's not going away because the articles stop. Marcus didn't say anything. And if I... He stopped. If I'm not there, the narrative loses its legs. The whole thing requires my presence to mean anything. A long pause. You're talking about leaving, Marcus said. I'm thinking about it. Have you talked to her about it? No. Nolan. If I talk to her about it, she'll tell me not to. She'll say she can manage it. She'll manage it and spend the next year managing it instead of running the company she built. Or, Marcus said slowly, you could treat her like an adult and let her be part of the decision. I know. You know, and you're going to do it anyway. He didn't answer. Okay, Marcus said in a particular tone. The tone of someone who understood that some decisions were already made and the conversation was really about something else. What are you actually afraid of? Nolan leaned back against the couch. The ceiling of his apartment was slightly uneven in one corner where the upstairs neighbor had caused some kind of water issue 3 years ago, and the repair had been done adequately but not invisibly. He'd looked at that corner more times than he could count. That she's better off, he said, without the noise around her. That I'm... He stopped, started again. That the cleanest thing I can do for her is not be there. That's the thing you want to believe, Marcus said. It might be true. It also might be an excuse. For what? For not asking her what she actually wants. A beat. You said she doesn't perform. You said she says what she means, but you're not giving her a chance to say it. Nolan looked at the ceiling. I know, he said. For the second time in the conversation, he said it differently this time. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. I don't know yet, Nolan said. He did know. He just wasn't ready to say it. He submitted the resignation on a Friday. He wrote it on Thursday night, after Iris was asleep, at the kitchen table with his laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold while he was drafting it. He wrote 3 versions. The first one was too explanatory. It gave reasons in a way that felt defensive. The second one was too bare, 1 paragraph that said nothing. The third one was the one he sent, a version that was honest about his reason in the only way that didn't involve saying anything about Celine. That he believed his continued presence created complications for the company that his contribution didn't outweigh, and that he was grateful for the opportunity and wished Vertex well. He sent it at 11:47 on Thursday night, addressed to HR and copied to Hector. He did not copy Celine. He didn't sleep well. Sleep. He lay in his bed and listened to the sounds of the apartment, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car outside, Iris's occasional shifting in the next room. And he thought about the fact that what he was doing was either the right thing or the cowardly thing, and he genuinely wasn't certain which, and maybe both could be true at the same time. And maybe that was the most honest thing about it. In the morning, he got Iris ready for school. He made her toast. He reminded her 3 times that it was library day and she needed to bring back the book about horses she'd had for 2 weeks. And she said, "I know, Dad," in the exact voice she'd inherited from him. The voice that meant, "I'm aware and I wish you'd stop saying it." He watched her walk into the school building, and he felt the precise weight of being someone who makes decisions that affect a child who has no say in any of them. He drove to work. He cleared his desk quietly, which didn't take long because he hadn't accumulated much in 11 weeks. His laptop, a coffee mug, the photo of Iris that Celine had noticed in their first real conversation. He held it for a moment and then put it in his bag. Hector came by at 9:15. He stood at the entrance to Nolan's workspace, and he looked at the desk, and then at Nolan with an expression that was not bewildered this time. It was something sadder than that. "You don't have to do this," Hector said. "I think I do." "Nolan." "Hector, I appreciate it. I mean that. But this is the right call." Hector looked like he wanted to argue and had correctly assessed that the argument was over. He nodded once. "You're good at this," he said. "The work. You're really good at it." "I'll find something." "I know you will. I'll write you a reference whenever you need it." He paused. "A strong one." Nolan thanked him. The email from Celine came at 9:53. "My office. Now. Not 1402. Her actual office. The one on 14 that he had never been in, the one with the glass wall that made it visible from the corridor, and the desk that was always covered in things that looked like chaos from the outside and were apparently a system she could navigate perfectly from the inside. He'd heard about it. He'd never had a reason to go there before. The door was open. She was at her desk when he arrived, and she looked up when he came in, and she looked the way she looked when she was managing something from the inside. But underneath the managing, there was something else. Something that Nolan recognized from the reflection of his own face in dark windows when he thought no one was watching. "Close the door," she said. He did. "Sit down." He sat. She had his resignation email open on her screen. He could see it from where he sat. The white of it, the small block of text that had taken him 3 tries and hadn't gotten easier. "Tell me why," she said. "I explained until Don't do that. Not angry. Firm. Tell me why. The actual reason." He looked at her. "You know why." "I want you to say it." "The story doesn't go away while I'm here," he said. "Every call Victor Hale makes, every whisper about your judgment, I'm what it points to. I'm the evidence. You're not evidence of anything. That's not the point." "Then what is the point?" "The point is that you built this company." He kept his voice even. He'd practiced this part. "You built it from nothing, and you ran it for 7 years, and you shouldn't have to spend your next year defending your capacity to run it because of—" He stopped. "Because of me," she said. "Because of a story about a dinner in Portland that got photographed." "That's not what you were going to say." He was quiet. "Nolan?" Her voice had changed. It was the voice from the elevator. The name said like a sentence. "Look at me." He looked at her. "You're making a decision about what I need," she said, "without asking me." "I know. I don't need protecting. I know that too." "Then why—" Something moved across her face, not quite controlled. "Why are you doing this like something that was already decided? Like you came in here just to tell me it's done?" "Because if I asked you," he said, "you'd tell me to stay. And you'd spend the next year managing the fallout, and you'd do it well because you do everything well, and it would cost you something. And I can't—" He stopped, steadied. "I can't be the thing that costs you something." The silence lasted long enough that he heard the ventilation in the building. Celine looked at him. She looked at him the way she'd looked at him across the restaurant table in Portland, with the expression that was not performed, not managed, just true. And what was in it now was something he hadn't let himself put a name to until this moment. Sitting in her office with a clear desk and a resignation that HR had already acknowledged. "You already are," she said quietly. That's not a complaint. I'm telling you it's already true, so the reason you're giving me doesn't work the way you think it does." He didn't have an answer for that. "Celine, I'm not going to beg you to stay," she said. "I won't do that." The managing was back, the layer of it, but thinner than usual. "But I need you to understand that this—" She stopped, looked at the window, looked back. "I don't do this. I don't let people. I don't have dinners where I say things I haven't said before. That's not something I do easily, and you were the exception, and I don't know yet what to do with that, but I know that you walking out of here because you've decided it's best for me is not—" She stopped again. "Is not what?" he said. "Is not something I get to agree to," she said. "You're deciding for me, and that is the one thing—" She pressed her mouth closed. The one thing she didn't accept. He'd known that from the beginning. The one thing that she had never tolerated. Being managed. Being protected from things without her consent. "I know," he said. He said it like he meant it. "You're right, and I'm sorry." "Then don't go." He looked at her. He thought about Victor Hale. He thought about his mother's face, tired in the cold at Iris's soccer game. He thought about all the things he managed and held and kept in the part of himself where the uncontrollable things lived. "I think I have to," he said. Her face closed. Not shut. It was more precise than that. It was the closing of something that had been open, a door going back to where it usually sat. She looked at him with the expression he'd first seen across a conference room on orientation day. Direct, readable, to him now in a way it hadn't been then, which meant he could see exactly what it was costing her to hold it steady. "Okay," she said. He stood up. "The paperwork will come through Monday," she said, back to the managing voice, the executive voice. "HR will process—" "Celine." She looked at him. He didn't know what he'd been going to say. Something true. something that wouldn't make it worse. He stood there for a second in the way of someone who has just understood that they have run out of the right words and the wrong ones are all that's left. "I'm not going anywhere because I don't want to be here," he said. "I need you to know that." She looked at the window. "Understood," she said. He left. The next 2 weeks were the administrative fact of being gone. He updated his resume. He reached out to former colleagues. He applied for 3 positions before the end of the first week, all data analytics roles, all at companies where he had no history and no complications. He took Iris to the park on a Saturday and pushed her on the swings until his arms hurt, listening to her explain with total authority the aerodynamics of swinging, which she had apparently been briefed on by a classmate. He visited his mother. She looked better that Sunday. Color in her face, the tiredness at a lower level than it had been. The numbers from her last labs had been cautiously good. The doctor had said we're seeing response in the particular careful way that medical professionals described good news, as if they were worried about jinxing it. Nolan had sat in the car after that appointment and simply breathed for about 4 minutes. He didn't tell her about leaving Vertex right away. When he did, 2 Sundays in, she listened without interrupting, which was how he knew she had thought she was organizing carefully. "Did you tell her why?" Carol asked. "Yes." "The real why?" "Yes." "And?" "She said I was making a decision for her." His mother was quiet for a moment. "Was she right?" "Yeah," he said. "Probably." Carol Pierce looked at her tea. "You have a pattern," she said, "of deciding what's best and then doing it, alone." "I know." "Your father did too." She said it without bitterness, matter of fact the way she said most things. "He decided what was best for this family and never checked if we agreed with his math." Nolan looked at his hands. "I'm not comparing you to him," she said. "You stayed. That's different. But the mechanism, the deciding alone, that's the same piece." He nodded. "Is she okay?" Carol asked. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I don't have a way to know." His mother nodded slowly. She picked up her crossword and looked at it. She looked at it for a while. "She'll be okay," she said finally. "She sounds like someone who has always had to be." Bam. Vertex continued without him visibly and completely, the way organizations do. He knew this because Dana texted him twice. Once to say the Meridian integration had hit a snag on the security protocols, and once to say it had been resolved, and both texts had the quality of someone reporting in for reasons neither of them was going to name directly. He appreciated it. He heard nothing from Celine. He had not expected to. He understood her well enough by now. She wouldn't reach out, not after what had happened in that office, not after he'd made the choice he'd made. She had a sense of personal dignity that wasn't pride exactly, but ran on similar tracks, and he had, in a meaningful way, overridden her. And that was not something she moved past quickly or easily. He understood it, and it still sat in him like a stone. 3 weeks after he left, Marcus took him to dinner at a place with terrible lighting and good burgers, and they sat across from each other, and Marcus ate most of the fries, and Nolan told him everything, the office conversation, what she'd said about deciding for her, the way her face had closed. Marcus listened to all of it. "You love her," Marcus said. Nolan didn't answer immediately. "I know," he said. "Does she know?" "I think she knows something." "That's not the same." "I know that's not the same." Marcus ate a fry. "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing. Right now, nothing. She needs to not be managing the fallout from a story about her judgment. That's still true. That hasn't changed." "Nolan," Marcus looked at him steadily. "You left so she wouldn't have to deal with that. And she's still dealing with it. The only difference is now you're not there." He hadn't thought about it in exactly those terms. He sat with it for a moment. "I know," he said. For the 1,000th time, probably, the phrase was becoming something of a personal anthem. "You say that a lot," Marcus observed. "I know things clearly and do them badly," Nolan said. "It's a character flaw." "At least you're consistent." He almost smiled. His phone rang at 6:47 the following Thursday evening. Unknown number, local area code. He almost didn't pick it up. He'd been getting calls from recruiters, and he'd started letting them go to voicemail. But something made him answer. "Mr. Pierce?" A voice he didn't recognize. Young, professional, slightly rushed. "This is Clearview Medical Center. We're calling about a Celine Cross. You're listed as an emergency contact in her phone." Nolan was already standing up. "What happened?" he said. "Miss Cross was brought in approximately 40 minutes ago. She collapsed at her office and was transported by ambulance. She's stable. I want to say that first, she's stable. But she's asking for—" He was already looking for his keys. "Tell her I'm coming," he said. He was in his car in under 2 minutes. He called his mother from the road. "Carol, can you get Iris tonight? Something came up. I'll explain later." And his mother said go the way she said things when she already understood the shape of it. He drove through the city with the focused urgency of a man who has suddenly and completely stopped pretending he doesn't know what matters most to him. The hospital was 20 minutes away. He made it in 14. The emergency room at Clearview Medical had the specific quality of all emergency rooms at night, fluorescent and relentless, the kind of lighting that made everyone look like a version of themselves that hadn't slept. Nolan gave Celine's name at the front desk and was told to wait. And he waited with the particular stillness of a man who had nothing useful to do with his hands and was trying not to think about everything he might have done differently in the past 3 weeks. A nurse came out at 8:14. Young woman, efficient, the kind of tired that had been there long enough to become a baseline. "She's stable," the nurse said before he could ask. "Exhaustion, dehydration, low blood pressure." She pushed herself to a point her body stopped cooperating. "Can I see her?" "She asked for you specifically." The nurse gave him a look that was professionally neutral and personally curious. "Room 114, down the hall, left." He found the room. The door was half open. He knocked anyway. "Come in," Celine said. She was in a hospital bed with the back raised to sitting position, an IV line running into her left arm, still in the clothes she'd worn to the office. Dark blouse, tailored pants, the small details of a person who had not planned to be here. Her hair was down. He'd never seen her hair down before. It made her look different in a way he couldn't fully articulate. Less armored was the closest thing, though that wasn't quite it either. She looked at him when he came in. She had the particular expression of someone who has just been through something embarrassing and is managing their feelings about it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know," he said. He pulled the chair from the corner and sat down beside the bed. How long had it been building? She looked at the IV line. "I don't know. A while." "Celine." 3 weeks, she said. "Maybe a little more. I wasn't sleeping much. There was always something that needed doing, and I kept doing it, and eventually my body had an opinion about that." "What did the doctor say?" 48 hours of rest, fluids, a speech about stress management that I'm sure was well-intentioned. She said the last part without particular feeling. "Are you in pain?" "Headache. It's manageable." She shifted slightly against the pillow and made a small face that meant it was more than manageable, but she wasn't going to say so. He recognized the face. He'd been watching her manage things for 11 weeks. "Is there someone who should know you're here?" he said. "Family or—" "My parents are in Phoenix. I'll call them in the morning when I can tell them I'm fine and they don't need to get on a plane." She paused. "There isn't really anyone else." He nodded. He didn't say anything about that because she hadn't said it as a complaint. She said it the way she said most things, as a fact about the landscape. They sat in the quiet for a moment. The hospital sounds came through the walls, distant voices, the soft roll of equipment, the particular ambient hum of a building that never fully stopped. "Victor Hale called an emergency board session," Celine said. 3 days ago." Nolan went still. "What kind of session?" "The kind where they discuss whether the CEO's recent behavior, including, and I'm quoting the agenda item, personal entanglements that have affected professional decision-making, constitutes grounds for a leadership review." "They can't." "They can," she said. Her voice was even. "They have the authority to call a review. They don't have grounds to remove me, but a review is within their rights. And Victor knows that a review is enough to create the kind of instability that makes investors nervous." She looked at the ceiling. "He's been patient. I'll give him that. He waited until he had something that looked like evidence, and then he moved. The story from Portland." The story and the fact that I pulled a 6-week hire into a senior steering committee and the resignation, and now this. She gestured vaguely at the hospital room. He's building a picture, individual pieces that are each explainable. Together, they suggest a pattern. Nolan leaned forward in the chair. What are you going to do? I'm going to go to the board meeting. She said it without hesitation, which meant she'd already decided, which meant she'd been deciding it while she was lying in a hospital bed with an IV in her arm. I'm going to sit in front of Victor Hale and every other member of that board, and I'm going to remind them, with documentation, exactly what this company was when I took it and what it is now. When is it? 2 weeks. And between now and then? She was quiet for a moment. I go home tomorrow. I work from home for a week. I eat something, apparently, because the doctor was very specific about that. A small, self-deprecating note in her voice that was almost humor. Celine, she looked at him. Why did you put me as your emergency contact? The question sat in the room. She didn't answer immediately, and with Celine, the space before an answer was always meaningful. She wasn't someone who needed time to think of what to say. She was someone who needed time to decide whether to say it. I changed it a few weeks ago, she said. When you were still... She stopped. When you were still at Vertex. But you didn't change it back. No. He looked at her. She looked at the middle distance, somewhere between his face and the wall, the way she looked when she was being honest and wanted to do it without the full weight of eye contact. I'm sorry I didn't tell you, he said. She looked at him then. About which part? About the resignation. I should have talked to you first. Yes, she said. You should have. You were right. I made a decision about what was best for you without asking you. Yes, she said again, still even, not accepting it as an apology yet, waiting for the rest of it. And it came from... He stopped. Tried again. It came from something real. The logic of it was real. But the way I did it was... He turned it over. It was the way I've done things before, when I was afraid. Afraid of what? He sat with that. The fluorescent hum, the IV drip. Of being the reason things get harder for someone I... He stopped. Someone you what? She said. The room was very quiet. Someone I care about more than I know what to do with, he said. Celine looked at him. The hospital light caught the side of her face and she looked tired and real and completely unlike any version of the armored executive he'd first seen across a conference room. And he thought about how long it had taken him to see the distance between those two people and how certain he was now that the second one was the true one. That's the first time you've said that, she said. I know. In those words. I know. She exhaled. Not quite a sigh. Something that released something. I'm not good at this, she said. I want you to know that up front. I don't do this well. I haven't done it in a long time. And the last time I tried, the person couldn't separate me from the company, and eventually I stopped being able to tell if they could. I can separate you from the company. I know you can. She looked at her hands. That's actually the problem. It's easier when people can't. Then I know what they want. What do you think I want? She looked at him directly. I think you want me. The actual me. And that's harder to know what to do with. Nolan leaned forward slightly. Why is that harder? Because if you wanted the company or the position or the idea of me, I could say no and it would be clean. But you came to a hospital at 8 o'clock on a Thursday. Her voice changed on that. The precision of it slipping slightly, the control doing what it did when something got past it. You got here in 14 minutes. I know because I was watching the clock. He didn't say anything. I don't know how to need someone, she said. I'm aware that's a real problem. I built a whole life around not needing anyone because needing people and then having things change is... She stopped. The accident changed how people saw me. Not all of them, but enough. Enough that I learned very quickly that depending on someone is a calculation that can go wrong, and I stopped making that calculation. Celine. He said her name the same way she said his, as a sentence. I'm not going to tell you it won't go wrong. I don't know that. I know. I can tell you that I've been sitting in my apartment for 3 weeks trying to convince myself that the right thing was staying away, and the only thing I actually convinced myself of is that I'm bad at staying away from you. Something moved across her face. That's not exactly a promise, she said. No, he said. It's more honest than a promise. She looked at him for a long moment. The IV machine made a quiet sound. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed. You should go home, she said. You have Iris. My mother has Iris tonight. Still, she shifted against the pillow. I'm fine. I'm going to sleep. You drove here in however many minutes, and you should go home and sleep. I'll go in an hour, he said. Nolan, an hour, he said. And then I'll go. She looked at him. She looked like she was going to argue, and then she looked like she'd decided not to, and then she looked like someone who had been holding something very tightly for a long time and was considering carefully the possibility of setting it down. Okay, she said, quietly. He stayed 2 hours. She fell asleep about 40 minutes in, mid-sentence, actually, something she was saying about the board documentation she was going to need to pull together, and then her voice slowed and the sentence didn't finish. And when he looked up, she was asleep with the profound completeness of someone who had not actually slept in weeks and had finally stopped being in charge long enough for it to catch up. He sat in the chair for another hour and 20 minutes. He did not examine this too closely. He just sat. She was discharged the next afternoon. She went home to her apartment, a place Nolan had never been, that he knew existed but only as a concept, the place outside the office where she went when she wasn't the CEO. He texted her that evening. How's the eating something going? 20 minutes. I had soup. Voluntarily? There was a very insistent delivery person. He smiled at his phone. He was sitting on the couch watching Iris do something complicated with building blocks on the floor. She'd been in a construction phase for 3 weeks, buildings of increasing structural ambition that she described in detail and then knocked down with tremendous satisfaction. Rest tomorrow, he typed. I have the documentation to pull together for... Rest tomorrow. Documentation is a Thursday problem. A longer pause. You're very bossy for someone who doesn't work here. He looked at that for a second, something warm and uncomfortable at the same time. The here, the precision of it. How is the documentation actually looking? He sent. I have everything I need, she sent back. 7 years of it. I built this company clean. The numbers don't lie. They don't, he agreed. Victor Hale has never built anything, she said. It came through as a separate message, a few seconds after the first. He has managed things other people built, and he has made money from things other people made, and he has never once started with nothing and turned it into something. And he wants to sit across from me and question my capacity. There was a heat in it that was different from her usual register. Not out of control. She was never out of control. But real. Unfiltered. You should say exactly that, Nolan typed. At the board meeting. Not the Victor Hale part specifically, but the rest. I was going to present the data, and then say the rest. They need both. A pause. That's not how I usually operate. I know. Do it anyway. Longer pause. You're still bossy. I know. He could feel her almost smile through the screen, which was either a real thing or the most optimistic interpretation of a text message, and he decided he didn't care which. The board meeting was on a Tuesday, 2 weeks after the hospital. Nolan wasn't there. He had no reason to be there, no position at the company, no official role of any kind. He knew it was happening because Celine had told him. They had been talking every few days. Nothing declared, nothing formalized, the kind of talking that exists in the space before people decide what to call it. She'd told him the date. She hadn't asked him to do anything about it. He understood that she needed to walk into that room alone. He spent the day doing the thing people do when they're waiting for news they can't affect. He worked on a project for one of the companies he'd been consulting with on a short-term contract, and he picked Iris up from school, and he made dinner, and he watched the clock with the part of his brain that wasn't doing any of those things. At 7:12, his phone buzzed. Still here. He exhaled. How did it go? He sent. 3 minutes. Victor Hale is no longer on the board. He read that twice. Explain. He moved for a formal leadership review. I presented 7 years of financials, growth metrics, and documented decisions with outcomes. Then I reminded the board, specifically, calmly, and with my attorneys present, that a leadership review triggered without cause could constitute a breach of my executive agreement, which would be expensive and public. And 2 board members who have been sitting on the fence about Victor for 2 years decided this was the moment to stop sitting on the fence. The motion failed 4-2. Victor resigned rather than stay in a diminished position, which is, honestly, very Victor. Nolan sat back. You went in there with lawyers. I always go in there with lawyers. I just don't always put them in the room. He laughed, actually laughed out loud, in his kitchen, which made Iris look up from the table. What's funny? She asked. Someone I know did something smart, he said. Iris considered this. Is it the lady from your job? He looked at his daughter. What lady? The one you think about. She said it with the total unconcerned authority of a 7-year-old reporting on observable data. When you're making dinner, sometimes you get a face. I get a face. Like you're thinking about something that's not dinner. Nolan put his phone face down on the counter. Eat your vegetables, he said. I am eating my vegetables, Iris said, pointing to a single piece of broccoli she had clearly just moved to the front of her plate as evidence. Is she nice? Yes, he said, before he could decide whether to. Yeah, she's nice. Iris nodded, apparently satisfied, and went back to her dinner with the air of someone who had confirmed a hypothesis. He picked his phone back up. Congratulations, he sent. Thank you, she sent. Then, after a moment, I said the other thing too. What you said, about building from nothing. What did they say? Richard Osei? He's been on the board since year 2. He started clapping, just him, for about 3 seconds, before he realized he was the only one and stopped. It was extremely awkward. I love Richard Osei, Nolan typed. He's 73 and he has never once tried to manage me. He sounds like a good person. He is. A pause. Nolan. Yeah, I'd like to see you. I'm not asking for anything specific. I'd like to see you. He looked at his daughter eating her broccoli with theatrical commitment. He looked at the kitchen of his small apartment, the corner where the repair was still slightly visible, the refrigerator covered in Iris's drawings held up with magnets. Saturday, he sent. Bring something to eat. Iris will want to talk to you for approximately 400 words about soccer, and then she'll forget you're there. A pause longer than usual. She knows about me? She knows I think about someone when I'm making dinner. Another pause. Saturday, Celine sent. Saturday, he confirmed. He put the phone down. He looked at Iris. Iris looked at him with the expression of a child who understood more than she was supposed to and was choosing not to make it weird. Can I have dessert? She asked. You have 3 pieces of broccoli left. She looked at them, looked at him, ate all 3 in rapid succession with the focused energy of someone completing a transaction. Dessert, she said. Yes. Saturday arrived with the particular nervousness of things that matter being made concrete. Nolan cleaned the apartment, which he would have done anyway, but this time he caught himself rearranging things on the coffee table twice and made himself stop. He told Iris that someone was coming for lunch, and Iris asked if it was the dinner face lady, and he said yes, which produced a reaction that was part excitement and part the considered assessment of someone taking their evaluation responsibilities seriously. Does she like soccer? Iris asked. I don't know, Nolan said honestly. I'll tell her about it, and then we'll see, Iris said, with the logic of a scientist establishing baseline conditions. Celine arrived at 12:15, which was 12:15 exactly, because she was precisely on time for everything she chose to show up for. She had a bag from a bakery that Nolan recognized as the good one on Meridian Avenue, which meant she had done some research, or had asked someone, or had simply known. He wasn't sure which, and it didn't particularly matter. She looked different outside the office. The same person, but in the context of a Saturday and a civilian coat in the street outside his building, she had a quality that the office didn't allow. A version of herself that was just present, not managing anything. He held the door open. She came through. "Hi," she said. "Hi," he said. Neither of them moved for a second, adjusting to the fact of each other in this context. Then Iris appeared from the hallway with the decisiveness of a child who had been waiting a reasonable amount of time and had decided the reasonable amount of time was over. She stopped about 3 feet from Celine and looked at her with frank, uncomplicated curiosity. The kind of assessment that adults learn to hide, but children haven't yet seen any reason to. "You're in a wheelchair," Iris said. "Iris?" Nolan said. "I am," Celine said. She looked at Iris with the same directness she brought to everything, and Nolan noticed, immediately, with a feeling he was going to have to sort out later, that she didn't adjust her voice or soften her expression in the way adults usually did when talking to children. She just looked at her like a person. "Does it go fast?" Iris asked. "Faster than you'd think." "Could I—" Iris looked at Nolan. "Could I try it sometime?" "Iris, that's not—" "Maybe sometime," Celine said. "When we know each other better." Iris absorbed this as a reasonable answer to a reasonable question, and then pivoted without pause. "Do you like soccer? I play soccer. I scored a goal last week, but also I accidentally went the wrong direction, and my dad laughed." "He laughed?" "It was a little funny," Nolan said. "I don't know very much about soccer," Celine told Iris, "but I'd like to." And that was it. That was the entry. Iris took it as an open door and walked directly through it, and for the next 25 minutes she provided Celine with what Nolan could only describe as a comprehensive briefing. The rules, her team, her coach, the aerodynamics, the wrong direction incident in more detail than he'd heard before. And finally a demonstration of ball control in the hallway that he gently redirected to the living room, then back to the hallway when the living room proved too narrow for the ambition. He made coffee in the kitchen and watched through the doorway. Celine sat near the hallway entrance and watched Iris with an expression he hadn't seen before. Not the considering expression, not the managing expression. Something quieter than both of those. Something that was just watching something and finding it good. She looked up and caught him watching. She didn't look away. Neither did he. "Coffee's ready," he said. "Okay," she said. Iris looked between them with the expression of a 7-year-old completing a calculation. "You have the dinner face right now," she informed her father. Celine turned to look at him. "I have no idea what she's talking about," Nolan said. He poured the coffee. Celine took hers the way she always took it, and the fact that he knew how she took it without asking was a small thing. But it was the kind of small thing that meant something. They sat at his kitchen table, and Iris sat with them for approximately 10 minutes before she remembered something important happening in her room and disappeared the way children do when they've gathered enough information and have things to process. The apartment was quiet. "She's great," Celine said. "She's a lot," Nolan said. "Yeah," Celine said. "That's what I mean." He looked at her across the table. She was holding her coffee mug in both hands, something he'd noticed she did when she wasn't in the office, when she could hold it without the mug being a prop in a professional setting. Her hair was loose again, the way it had been in the hospital, and the Saturday light from the window was coming in at an angle, and the whole thing was so far from the 14th floor and the glass walls and the corporate machinery that it almost felt like a different life. Maybe it was. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Actually?" "Better," she said. "I slept 8 hours Thursday night. I didn't remember what that felt like." "Do you actually know how to rest?" "I'm learning." She looked at the table, then back at him. "I told my parents about the hospital. My mom cried. My dad asked if I was eating, and then my mom cried again." "Are you eating?" "I had breakfast," she said. "That's 2 days in a row. High bar." "I'm building toward it." Small pause. "Nolan?" "Yeah." "I know I said I wasn't good at this." She turned the mug slightly. "I want to try anyway. I'd like to try." He looked at her. "Not knowing how it goes?" "Not knowing how it goes," she confirmed, "which is terrifying," he said. "I was going to say uncomfortable, but terrifying is also accurate." She met his eyes. "I'm aware that's not a very romantic way of putting it." "It's the most you way of putting it," he said, "which I actually prefer." Her mouth moved toward the smile that wasn't quite a smile, the one that had been keeping him company in his own thoughts for weeks. Closer to an actual smile now, maybe. He was taking notes. From the hallway came the sound of Iris, apparently involved in something that required narration. She narrates everything, Nolan said. I know. I can hear her from here. Celine tilted her head, listening. She's explaining something to a stuffed animal. That's her default setting. I like it, Celine said. He looked at her, at this woman who had built something real and defended it and nearly broken herself doing it, and was sitting in his small apartment on a Saturday holding a coffee mug in both hands, telling him she wanted to try. And he thought about what his mother had said. Some people just see you. I like you being here, he said. She looked at him, not the managing look, not the considering look, just at him. Okay, she said. Simple as that. The most Celine answer that existed. 2 syllables that somehow contained everything she was still learning to say out loud. From down the hallway, Iris had concluded whatever briefing she was giving the stuffed animal and was apparently returning, her footsteps announcing her return, with the complete absence of stealth that characterized everything she did. Celine looked toward the hall and then back at Nolan, and her expression had something in it that was entirely new, a kind of warmth that was cautious and real at the same time, the warmth of something that didn't entirely know what it was yet, but had decided to exist anyway. He thought, this is what it looks like when something is actually starting. Iris reappeared in the kitchen doorway, sock situation once again asymmetrical, and looked between them with the quiet satisfaction of someone whose hypothesis had been thoroughly confirmed. Are we having the bakery stuff now? She asked. Yes, Nolan said. Good, Iris said. She climbed into her chair with total confidence. I want to tell you about my coach, she told Celine. He has a whistle with a very specific sound. Tell me everything, Celine said. And Iris did. The weeks after Saturday had a different quality to them than anything that had come before. Not easier exactly. Easier implied that the hard parts were over, and the hard parts, the logistical, practical, daily hard parts of 2 people trying to figure out how to exist in each other's lives, were in many ways just beginning, but different. The way weather is different after a front moves through, same sky, same city, air that's been changed by something passing. Celine came back on the following Wednesday evening. Nolan hadn't asked her to. She'd texted at 4:30. Is Wednesday too soon? He'd sent back, no. Iris has soccer from 5 to 6:30 if you want to come. Which was, he understood even as he sent it, a significant thing to offer. The soccer field was not a neutral professional space. The soccer field was Iris's territory, was Carol's territory, was the most personal geography in his week. Celine sent, I'll be there at 5. She was there at 5. She sat beside Carol Pierce on the folding chairs Nolan had brought. And Carol, who had heard everything, who knew the whole shape of it by now, said hello to Celine with the particular warmth she reserved for people she had already decided about, the warmth that didn't require any more information. Celine, for her part, handled Carol the way she handled everything that mattered, carefully, directly, without performance. She asked about the treatment and listened to the answer without the careful blankness that people sometimes put on when medical topics came up. And Carol noticed that, Nolan could tell, because Carol noticed everything. Iris scored nothing that day. She also committed what her coach diplomatically described as a territorial confusion involving the sideline, which resulted in a brief delay and a lot of laughter from the parents and Iris's total unfazed continuation of the game. Celine watched all of it. She watched Iris specifically with the focused attention she brought to things that she found genuinely interesting, and Nolan, standing a few feet away with coffee going cold in his hand, found himself watching Celine watch his daughter and feeling something so specific and so large that he had to look back at the field before he did something with it that wasn't appropriate for a Tuesday evening at a recreational soccer game. After, walking back to the parking lot, Carol fell into step beside Celine in a way that looked casual and was not. She's going to break things, Carol said, watching Iris, who was approximately 30 feet ahead of them, performing a celebration kick aimed at nothing. She already does, Nolan said. I mean the good things, Carol said. She was talking to both of them, but looking at Celine. The things you think are permanent. She'll make you realize they weren't. Celine was quiet for a moment. Is that a warning? It's an instruction, Carol said pleasantly, and walked ahead to catch up with her granddaughter. Nolan looked at Celine. Celine looked after Carol with an expression that was trying very hard to be neutral and was not fully succeeding. Your mother, she said. I know. I know. Celine looked at him sideways. Something moved through her face that was almost a laugh. I was going to say remarkable. I know that too, he said. She's been that way my whole life, and I've only recently started appreciating it properly. They walked the rest of the way to the parking lot without talking, which was the kind of silence that only happens between people who have stopped needing to fill it. Now, the interview request came from a journalist named Patricia Vance, who worked for a national technology publication that Nolan knew by reputation. Serious, well-sourced, the kind that tech executives wanted to be in when things were going well and feared when they weren't. The request was addressed to Celine, and it was on the surface about Vertex's growth trajectory and the upcoming Meridian integration results. Buried in the second paragraph of the email was a clause that was doing more work than its position suggested. We'd also like to address the recent public conversation about leadership and the challenges facing executives in high-scrutiny environments. Celine showed it to Nolan on a Thursday evening, sitting at his kitchen table after Iris was in bed. She turned her laptop and let him read it without saying anything first. He read it twice. She wants to ask about Victor Hale, he said. She wants to ask about everything, Celine said. Victor Hale, the board situation, the story from Portland. In the context of a profile, it's actually a better format than a statement or a press release. If I do it right. What does doing it right look like? Celine turned the laptop back. She looked at the screen for a moment. It looks like being honest in a way I usually don't do publicly. About the company, about what happened, about... She stopped. About what? He said. She looked at him. About you. He was quiet. Not personal details. Not anything that puts you in a position you haven't chosen. But the narrative that Victor was building... She paused. The only thing that actually defeats a bad narrative is a true one. And the true one is that I hired someone excellent. We worked well together, and the story made it complicated in a way that wasn't fair to either of us. And the rest of it? He said. The rest of it is mine, she said. The board situation, the collapse. The fact that I've been running this company for 7 years, and I'm 30 years old, and I've never once asked anyone to lower the bar for me. Something came into her voice that wasn't anger, but ran adjacent to it. The heat he'd seen in the text message after the board meeting, compressed and steady. I'm tired of existing in the defensive position. I'm tired of proving things that shouldn't require proof. Nolan looked at her across his kitchen table with the remains of dinner between them and the sounds of a sleeping child down the hall. Do the interview, he said. I want you there. He looked at her. As what? As you, she said, simply. You don't have to say anything. I'm not asking you to speak for me or defend me or perform anything. She looked at the laptop, then back. I don't want to walk in alone. He thought about what Marcus had said months ago. This is either nothing or a movie. He thought about his mother's instruction at the soccer field. The things you think are permanent. He thought about Iris asleep in the next room, about 14 weeks of a life that had been quietly reorganizing itself around a connection neither of them had planned for. Okay, he said. Kasab. Patricia Vance turned out to be a small, precise woman in her late 40s who had the quality of someone who asked soft questions that landed hard. She met them at Vertex, Celine's choice of location, which Nolan understood immediately. Home territory, a statement in itself. The interview was in Celine's actual office, not 1402, with its glass wall and its ordered chaos and the 7-year view of the city behind her desk. Nolan sat to the side, slightly back, not invisible, but not central. He'd thought about where to position himself for longer than he'd expected to. There was no arrangement that didn't mean something, in a room where everything was being observed. He settled for present and peripheral and let Celine determine the rest. Patricia Vance spent the first 30 minutes on the company. Numbers, strategy, the Meridian integration that had just completed its first phase with results that were, by any objective measure, strong. Celine talked about it with the fluency of someone who had built the thing and understood every part of it, and Patricia listened and asked follow-up questions that were good, specific, not softballs, and Nolan watched Celine operate in this mode and felt, as he had from the beginning, the particular respect of seeing someone genuinely excellent at something. Then Patricia looked at her notes and looked up. "I want to ask about the last few months," she said. "Not to relitigate. I'm not interested in the gossip angle. But I think there's a real story in what happened about what high-profile female executives face when their personal lives become part of the public record." Celine was quiet for a moment. Nolan didn't look at her. "There is a real story," Celine said. "I'm not sure everyone who's been telling it has been telling the true version." "What's the true version?" Celine looked at her directly. "I hired someone who was qualified. He was good at his job. We were on a business trip together. We had dinner, and someone photographed it in a way that implied a story that was partly accurate and mostly wrong." "Partly accurate meaning?" "Meaning we did have dinner. Meaning there was something personal beginning. Meaning the professional and personal had started to overlap in a way that I was aware of and was thinking carefully about." "And the part that was mostly wrong?" "The part that suggested my professional judgment had been compromised. That I'd promoted someone because of personal feeling rather than merit. That part." Celine's voice was even. "Nolan Pierce's work speaks for itself. The meridian analysis that closed that partnership was his. You can pull the documentation, the results are there." Patricia made a note. "There's also the board situation." "There is." "Victor Hale's resignation." "Yes." "Do you want to speak to that?" A brief pause. Nolan watched Celine decide, watched the specific moment of it, the small shift in her posture that meant she'd landed on the truth version rather than the managed version. "Victor Hale has been on the Vertex board for 4 years, Celine said. In that time, he has consistently questioned decisions I've made, positioned himself against expansions I proposed that later proved correct, and twice in private settings made comments about whether a company of Vertex's size required, his word was steadier, leadership." "Steadier meaning what?" "He never said exactly what he meant," Celine said. "He didn't have to. I'm 30 years old, I use a wheelchair, and I became CEO of a mid-sized tech company in my early 20s. The narrative that someone like that reaches for doesn't require a lot of elaboration." She held Patricia's gaze. "When the Portland story appeared, he moved. He called meetings, he built a case, and he presented it to the board as a concern about professional fitness. What he was actually doing was using a photograph of 2 people having dinner as a proxy for something he'd wanted to say for years but couldn't say directly." Patricia wrote for several seconds. "What did you want the board to know?" Celine was quiet for a moment. "I wanted them to know what I built," she said. "I brought documentation, 7 years of it, revenue growth, market position, every major decision I've made, what the alternatives were, and what happened. I wanted them to sit with the actual record, not a narrative about my capacity." She paused. "I also told them something I hadn't said before in that room, that I'd built this company from a wheelchair, after an accident that took 2 years of my life to understand, and that I'd done it without once asking anyone to account for that, or to make adjustments for it, or to see me differently because of it. And I was not going to start now by letting someone reframe my entire professional history as a question mark." The room was quiet. Patricia Vance looked at her for a moment. Then she wrote something. "Mr. Pierce," she said, turning to Nolan. He'd known this was coming. "You left Vertex in the middle of all this." "I did," he said. "Why?" He'd thought about how to answer this. He'd thought about it for several days. "Because I thought it was the right thing to do for the company," he said. "And I was partially right about that, and more wrong about it than I knew." "What were you wrong about?" "I made a decision on behalf of someone else without asking what they wanted," he said. "That's a version of not seeing someone clearly, thinking you're protecting someone and actually just deciding for them." Patricia looked between them. "Have you returned to Vertex?" "No," Nolan said. "Are you planning to?" He looked at Celine. Celine looked at him. "We're figuring that out," he said. It was the honest answer. They were. The logistics of it, whether and how he might return to the company, what form that would take, how to do it in a way that was clean professionally and didn't create the same problems that had existed before, were real and unresolved. He'd had 2 conversations with Richard Osei, who turned out to be exactly as good a person as Selene had suggested, and who had said, "I'd like to find a way to bring you back properly, not through a side door in a way that meant something." But properly was still being defined. Patricia Vance closed her notebook. "Last question," she said to Selene. "What do you want people to understand about this situation that they haven't understood?" Selene was quiet for a moment. The city was behind her through the window, mid-morning, the light flat and clear. That the thing that gets treated as the story, the wheelchair, the relationship, the bored drama, none of that is the story, she said. The story is a company that grew from 4 people to 400, that built something real, that I led through things that were genuinely difficult, and that is standing on solid ground today because of decisions I made over 7 years. Everything else is context. Some of it is important context, but context isn't the story. She held Patricia's gaze. "I'd like to be the story." Well, the piece ran 3 weeks later. It ran long. Patricia had given it real space, and the framing was what Selene had said she wanted. The company, the work, the record. The board situation was there, factual and documented. The Portland story was contextualized without being excused. Nolan appeared in it as himself, a data analyst who had done strong work, who had left under complicated circumstances, who was, in the journalist's careful phrasing, part of the fuller picture of a CEO who operates as a complete person, not a corporate function. The response was not a single thing. It was many things at once, the way responses to complicated true stories always are. Industry publications covered it with varying degrees of fairness. Social media did what social media does, which meant 2 days of volume and then the next thing. Several women who ran companies or had run companies sent Selene direct messages, some of which she showed Nolan, some of which she kept, all of which she read. Richard Osei sent a handwritten note, which Selene photographed and texted to Nolan without comment. It said, 7 years well run. Here's to the next 7. Victor Hale said nothing publicly, which was, Selene said, the most Victor Hale possible outcome. Dana called from Chicago and said, "Good piece, you could have said more." Selene said, "I know." Dana said, "Next time say more." Selene said, "I know," which was their entire conversation, and Nolan had heard enough about Dana by now to understand that this was high praise. The foundation came out of a conversation that didn't start as a business conversation. It was a Sunday evening in February, 3 months after the hospital, 2 months after the interview, deep enough into winter that the city had that gray, compressed quality that comes from weeks of cold without snow, everything holding its breath. Nolan and Selene were at his apartment, which had become, by degrees and without formal declaration, the place they spent Sunday evenings. Iris was asleep. Carol had been at dinner. She came every other Sunday now, which she'd arranged with Selene directly and without consulting Nolan, which he'd discovered after the fact and which both women considered completely normal. They were on the couch, the aftermath of the evening on the coffee table. Mugs, a book Selene had brought and put down, Iris's drawings covering one corner of the surface with the density of a full construction project. Selene was looking at something on her laptop. Nolan was reading, or trying to read, mostly watching her without meaning to. "I want to do something," she said. Not as a prelude, just the thought arriving out loud. "About what?" She turned the laptop slightly. She'd been reading about workplace accessibility studies. The gap between companies that declared accessibility commitments and companies that actually had built environments and systems that worked for people with disabilities in practical daily terms. "About this," she said. "I've been thinking about it since the interview. Patricia asked what I wanted people to understand, and I gave her the corporate answer, mostly. The real answer is," she stopped, looked at the screen. "I spent 7 years building a company, and I also spent 7 years navigating systems that were designed without me in mind. Both things are true. And I know things about the second part that most people who make decisions about it don't know." Nolan put down his book. "What kind of something?" "A foundation," she said. "Workplace accessibility, assistive technology, employment inclusion. Not a charitable gesture. I mean a real operational entity with a research component and direct program investment. She said this in the voice she had when something had been under development in her head for a while and was now finished enough to say out loud. Vertex can seed it. I have 3 people I want to talk to about it, and I want... She paused. What? She looked at him over the top of the laptop. I want you to build the data infrastructure for it, not as a favor, as an actual role with actual compensation. The analytics piece of something like this is complicated, and most nonprofits get it wrong from the start and spend years trying to fix it. She closed the laptop. Also, I would like you to stop consulting for other people and come back to working with me, because I find that arrangement significantly more functional. He looked at her. That's the professional case, she said. I can make it in more detail if you want. Is there a personal case? The personal case, she said, is that I am better at everything when you're involved, and I would prefer to formalize that in multiple areas of my life simultaneously. Nolan set his book on the coffee table. That's a very Celine way of saying something that's actually very not Celine. She almost smiled. The full version of it. She'd been doing that more, letting it complete, letting it land. He'd started to think of it as one of the specific good things about this specific life. The incremental appearance of a smile that had been rationed for years. Is that a yes? She said. Yes to the foundation, he said. Yes to the role. And yes to the other thing, which you didn't quite say. I said it, she said. Not exactly. She looked at him with the expression that meant she was deciding. It lasted about 4 seconds. I would like you in my life, she said. Formally, completely, in all the areas. Including the complicated ones? He said. I'm only interested in the complicated ones, she said. The uncomplicated ones are boring. He reached across and took her hand. She looked down at their hands and then up at him, and the expression on her face was the one he'd first glimpsed in Portland. Unguarded, without the armor, just the actual person, cautious and real and choosing. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. From down the hall, audible despite the hour, came the sound of Iris apparently awake and narrating something to her stuffed animals with quiet intensity. She's supposed to be asleep, Nolan said. I know, Celine said. She's been awake for at least an hour. How do you know? I can hear her through the wall. She looked toward the hallway. She's been explaining something about ocean currents for about 40 minutes. Nolan looked at the hallway, then at Celine. Do you want to go check on her? Celine considered this, and then she did something that Nolan was going to remember for a long time. She didn't calculate, didn't manage, didn't pause to evaluate the implications. She just said, yeah, and they went together. The Celine Cross Foundation launched in April with an event that was not a gala. Celine had been specific about this, that it would not have the quality of a fundraising performance, but of an actual beginning, which meant a smaller room, 40 people, a program that had been built and was real and was ready to start doing what it said it would do. Nolan had spent 11 weeks building the data systems for it. It was the most interesting infrastructure problem he'd worked on in years, maybe ever. The intersection of employment data, accessibility metrics, and program outcomes in a way that most organizations never managed to integrate cleanly. He'd done it cleanly. He was proud of it in the specific way of work that had been done right. He was also, as of 6 weeks prior, back at Vertex. Richard Osei had done what he'd said, found a way to bring him back properly through a newly structured senior analytics role that was documented and announced and had nothing sideways about it. The story was old news. The industry had moved to other things. He came back to his desk on a Monday morning, and Hector had brought donuts, and Dana had sent an email from Chicago that said simply, good, and that was apparently all the ceremony required. At the foundation launch, Celine spoke for 12 minutes without notes. She had done this on purpose. No notes, no teleprompter, no managed distance. She stood in front of 40 people and said what the foundation was, what it was going to do, and why. She said, I know what it costs to build something in a world that was not built with you in mind. I know it at a professional level because I have been in rooms my whole career where certain assumptions were made before I said a word. I know it at a physical level Because I move through infrastructure every day that treats my existence as an afterthought. And I know it at a personal level, which I'm going to be less specific about, but which has to do with learning, slowly and with difficulty, and with help I didn't ask for gracefully, that needing people is not the same as being less. She paused. This foundation exists because I believe that the gap between what's possible and what currently exists is not a gap of resources. It's a gap of will and of imagination and of the very basic decision to include people in the design of systems that are supposed to serve them. We're going to work on closing that gap. We're going to do it with real data and real programs, and we're going to measure what we do so we can tell the truth about what works. She looked at the room. We start tomorrow, she said. Richard Osei started clapping immediately. This time, other people clapped with him. Nolan was standing near the back. He clapped with everyone else, and he watched her from across the room. This woman who had said what she meant, who had built something real and defended it, and rebuilt the parts that broke and was standing in front of it all now, choosing to be seen. And he felt the specific thing that you feel when you have been paying attention long enough to watch someone become more fully themselves. She found him across the room. That direct look, the original one, the one that had started everything, that had been what he'd been trying to describe to Marcus on day one, the thing that he still didn't entirely have words for. She was in conversation with someone, and she found him across the room and held it for just a second, and in that second was everything. The elevator, the Portland dinner, the hospital corridor, his kitchen table, his daughter explaining ocean currents through a wall. He nodded once. She turned back to her conversation. Gut. 3 weeks after the foundation launch, Celine asked him about the message. They were in her apartment, the first time he'd been there, a place that was exactly what he would have predicted and also completely surprising. Ordered in ways that reflected her mind, but with evidence of actual living. A blanket on the couch that had been there long enough to have a shape, a plant on the windowsill that was thriving because she'd apparently been more consistent about watering it than about eating breakfast. A stack of books on the side table that was rotated regularly and currently included a novel about the Oregon coast, a data visualization textbook that looked well used, and a book about childhood development that she'd said she was reading for reasons she described as general interest and that he had not pushed her on. They were on the couch. Iris was at Emily's this week. Those weeks had a specific texture to them, the apartment quieter in a way that sometimes felt like relief and sometimes felt like the wrong kind of quiet. He'd been reading. Celine had her laptop. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yeah." "The text." He looked up. "The original one," she said. "Do you still have it?" He considered this. "Probably. My texts don't delete automatically." He picked up his phone, went back through months of messages, found Marcus's thread with the familiar density of their correspondence. He scrolled back. Found the day. Found the out-of-sequence timestamp that marked the accidental send. He found it. He handed her the phone. She read it. He knew what it said. He didn't need to read it again. "I thought she would be intimidating, but she's stunning." She looked at it for a moment. Her expression was doing something he'd become fluent in reading. Something moving through it that she wasn't going to name out loud, the kind of feeling that she acknowledged internally and then held with both hands. "You wrote this on day one," she said. "Yes." "Before we'd had a single conversation." "I'd watched you speak for 10 minutes, he said. "I was giving Marcus an update." She looked at the screen again. "What were you going to say after, but?" "What do you mean?" "You had a thought that got interrupted by the word but," she said. "You thought she would be intimidating, but she was stunning. What else were you thinking?" He considered it honestly. He went back to that moment, the paper cup of terrible coffee, the 14th floor corridor, the particular afternoon light, and the slightly too slow elevator. The 10 minutes in that conference room watching her speak. "I was thinking she meant it," he said. "Everything she was saying. The thing about loyalty versus honesty. I was thinking she was going to be difficult to work for in the way that people who actually mean things are difficult, because there's nowhere to hide in that kind of environment." He paused. "And I was thinking she had the most direct eyes I'd ever seen. And then I thought that was not an appropriate thing to think about your CEO on your first day. And I was going to tell Marcus that, and then I sent it to you instead." She handed the phone back. "I was having the worst week," she said. "When you started. The Victor situation had started to feel like something that was going to actually move, not just threaten. And I was tired in a way I hadn't told anyone about. She looked at the window. And then I got that text from an unknown number, and I laughed. Actually laughed. Alone in my office. And I sat there for a second thinking, who is this person? What did you decide? That you were either someone I was going to have to fire or someone who was going to matter, she said. I didn't know which yet. When did you know? She thought about it. The late night, the date range. When you said I was going to fix it in the morning, I already knew. A pause. I just didn't know what to do with knowing it yet. Nolan set his phone on the cushion beside him. He thought about all the distances between that day and this one. The meetings and the trip and the photos and the resignation and the hospital corridor and his kitchen table and the foundation launch and Iris explaining ocean currents. And how none of it had been clean. None of it had resolved the way you'd plan it if you were planning it. How most of it had been imperfect and complicated and costing something the whole way through. I was right the day I sent it, he said. Everything I was thinking in that hallway. She looked at him. The apartment was quiet. The plant on the windowsill was in the late afternoon light. I know, she said, soft, and I've been right every day since. Something moved across her face, said, not the almost smile this time, the real one, the full one, the one she'd been rationing for years. It was not a neat expression. Her eyes were bright in a way that she would probably, if asked, describe as the light in here or something similarly deflecting. He knew better by now. That's embarrassingly sincere, she said. I'm aware, he said. You should probably know that I'm not good at accepting things like that. I know you're not, he said. You can work on it. She looked at him for a long moment, the brightness still there, the full smile still there, doing what it did, making everything in the room change slightly. Okay, she said. 2 syllables. The most Celine sentence that existed, the one that meant everything she hadn't learned yet to say at full volume. He'd come to understand that okay from her was never just okay. It was, I'm trying. It was, I'm here. It was, I'm choosing this with both eyes open, which is the only way I know how to choose anything. He understood that. He'd spent years choosing things with his eyes not fully open. The marriage, the silence, the resignation he'd filed without asking the person it most affected. He'd spent years being good at the easy presences and absent from the things that cost something. He was working on that too. They were both working. That was the real shape of it. Not a story about 2 people who found the right person and became complete, but a story about 2 people who were incomplete in compatible ways and decided to be incomplete together, which is a harder thing to do and a realer thing, and the only version of this that actually lasts. His mother's 6-month scan came back in March with numbers that the oncologist described as significant response. Not remission. Nobody said remission yet because the medical profession is careful with words for good reason. But significant response, which meant the treatment was doing what they needed it to do, which meant the margin had widened. Nolan sat in the parking lot of the medical building after that appointment and did not cry, exactly, but he sat there for about 10 minutes doing something that was adjacent to it. Releasing something he'd been holding so long, he'd stopped feeling the weight of it until it started to lift. He called Celine. She picked up on the second ring. How was the scan? She said. She'd known it was today. She'd texted him that morning. Let me know. Good, he said. Really good. A pause. Nolan? Just his name. The sentence version. I know, he said. And he meant it differently than he'd ever meant it. Not I know, as in I have already concluded this. Not I know as in I am aware of the facts. But I know as the thing you say when someone says your name in a particular way, and you understand that they see you, actually see you, and you want them to know that you feel it landing. Go be with her, Celine said. I'll see you Sunday. Sunday, he said. He sat in the parking lot for another minute. He thought about a text message sent to the wrong person on a first day at a job, and how it had opened something he hadn't known was closed. He thought about how the smallest wrong things sometimes open the right doors. He thought about his daughter asleep in the next room while 2 imperfect, cautious adults sat on a couch, learning how to need each other out loud. He thought about what it means to see someone, not the idea of them, not the version of them that's easiest to manage or least threatening to your own arrangement, but the actual person, with all the complicated, inconsistent, unresolvable parts still intact. He thought Celine had been right about something early on in a hospital room with an IV in her arm, that needing people is not the same as being less. He'd known it intellectually before he understood it in his body. There's a difference. He drove to his mother's house. Carol Pierce was in the kitchen when he arrived, making the tea she made every afternoon, moving with the slightly deliberate pace that the treatment had installed in her body and which she refused to comment on. She looked up when he came in. She saw his face. "Good news," she said. Not a question. "Good news," he said. She turned back to the kettle. Her shoulders changed, something releasing in them, something she'd been holding in her own way, in her own private version of the held breath. "Sit down," she said. "I'll make you something." He sat at his mother's kitchen table, in the house where he'd grown up, and he sat there while she made tea and the afternoon came through the window, and somewhere upstairs his daughter, she was spending the afternoon here, the way she did, was audible in the distance, narrating something to someone who was probably not going to be able to get a word in for a while. Carol set the tea in front of him. She sat down across the table. She looked at her son. "She's good for you," she said. Not a question either. "I know," he said. "You're good for her too," she said. "I want you to know I see that. You think people just need to be good for you, but the other direction matters too." He nodded. "She going to come for Easter?" Carol asked, which was her way of saying everything else she meant about it. "I'll ask her," he said. Carol nodded, satisfied, and picked up her tea. From upstairs, Iris's narration paused for approximately 3 seconds, and then resumed with renewed urgency, as if whatever story she was telling had just reached a critical development. Nolan listened to his daughter's voice coming through the ceiling of his mother's house, and he drank the tea and he thought, this is the thing. Not the story you plan, not the version where everything resolves cleanly into a lesson with edges. The thing is the kitchen table. The thing is the ceiling above your head and your mother's hands around her mug, and the voice of your kid carrying through the walls of a house that has held your whole life. The thing is the people who see you when you're not performing. The thing is choosing that every single day, imperfectly, incompletely, with the mess of it still showing, choosing that.